So the googly thing put me onto this guy, ThePrimeTime. Actually, I was introduced to him by a friend of mine who said, "Oh, look what's going on in coding. Look at how the kids are seeing the coding thing." And he's an interesting guy. He's got some interesting points. A lot of these people though are confused about the history of the industry they're in, where things are coming from, right? And when you have a collapsing society, which we do, see navigating patterns. If you want to know more about that. A lot of the things you see, especially if you're, let's say, not well versed, not studied in history, maybe never read a book once, ever, just one, you'll come to weird conclusions like politicians are telling you to learn to code. That never happened, ever. The politicians were convinced by the intellectual class that everybody could learn to code and that that would be good for them. Both of these are false. He's talking a lot about Agile too, and one of the interesting things about Agile that people don't really understand. I mean, he's right about there's no management in Agile. Agile is an anti-management strategy to software explicitly. Just listen to the history of Agile. We had a 10-person company. We were all had more than 10 years of experience in the industry. Two things you don't have at your company for sure. And we wanted to design our software without middle level management. Okay, it's an anti-management strategy. If you have a large project, you need management. You can't do that. Actually, he kind of makes that latter point in there, right? Like you can't manage anything with Agile, right? Scrum is, specifically lowest common denominator stuff. It's communism. That's correct. Agile is communism, right? It's never done correctly, right? True Agile hasn't been tried, and it never works, and it always results in horrible outcomes. True. There are some exceptions to that. Usually around personal experience, not product success. You'll almost never hear a story of Agile product success. You'll hear a story of Agile team success. That should be the hint right there that it doesn't scale correctly, right? It can provide good code for your team, but not a good product for your company. Just is what it is. Everybody should know that. This idea that the boomers or the politicians or the man or the ancient aliens, whoever runs the country this week, lizard people, always my favorite, are the ones telling you, and you do this, and it's absurd. Like, the first problem is, and he does make this mistake, not everybody can learn to code. Most people learn to code will suck at it, period. End of stage. It's just hard. Interestingly, with Agile breaks the problem down to very small parts. This idea of functions that do only one thing. The only time you want to break a function down into like 4 lines of code, which in my mind is almost never, ever under any circumstances, is because that function is reused, and it will always be used in exactly the same way every reuse. That's not a common condition, right? If you are in the circumstance where you have a function that meets those criteria, put it in a library. Do not check it into your source code. That is an error. Period. End of statement. Full stop. That's where the problem is. We've lost libraries. We've lost them. We're using other people's libraries without knowing what they are, how they operate, and what they were designed to do, and therefore what their limitations are and things you shouldn't use them for. And that creates bugs and causes performance problems and causes all kinds of side effects that we never see coming, and also causes us to write less than 10% of the code that we ship, and 90% of the code that people are shipping, and this has been true for 15 years, is not code we wrote. This is true for very large projects with millions of lines of code. I worked on 2 projects, millions of lines of code, like 2 and 3 million lines of code, and I did the math. Less than 10% of the code that made up the XE were the 2 million lines of code written by the software engineers. Less than 10%. I don't know what to tell you about that. You're not using libraries at that point. I don't know what the hell you're doing. You're not really using libraries. You're just stealing code, which, whatever, it's freely given, right? That you don't understand, and it's having effects that you can't possibly understand. Like, not that, oh, if you did enough study, no. Right? So the flattening of the world is in software, right? You flatten the world, you take away the depth of things like linking and libraries and multi-factor coding, where you trade that off for a GUI versus mid-tier versus back-end versus DevOps, right? Because DevOps snuck back in, of course, it was always there, right? Just called something different. For this idea that the software engineer can do everything and they just do it in these small functions. And when it's small functions, guess what? You can tell somebody to go change that function and they don't need to be a software engineer anymore. Because a small enough function, anybody can understand it. It effectively becomes a script. It's not software engineering anymore. And before you say, hey, well, it works, look at Netflix, that's not how Netflix operates. That's how some people in Netflix say it operates. But if you listen really carefully to the Netflix guys, they have two sets of microservices. Two sets. One set is controlled by a core team of engineers. It never gets touched. Why is that? That's because those functions touch everything and they're core to the product. And if you make a bad change, it will destroy all the other functions or a significant number of them. That's why that has to happen in software design. It has to. It's not optional. And the argument over how many, quote, things a function should do, that's smoke and mirrors. How many things should a function do? What are things? That's the problem. Same problem you find with relevance realization, with John Vervaeke's work. Same problem in philosophy, right? What is a thing? How do we name things? These are all the same problem, actually, right? And so you see this collapse happen in the software industry. This is still my thing, right? Meaning crisis hit software industry. Boom! All the problems of meaning crisis, of course they would hit there first, or they would hit in a smaller place first. They probably hit other places before the software industry, right? Where everything gets flattened and collapsed and democratized and made easy for everybody to do and equal. Now, anybody can go to a boot camp, which doesn't work, by the way, right? And then learn to code. Right. Okay. This is a philosophical selling point that was tried on the software industry. It's nothing to do with politics, or it has nothing to do with lizard people or generations like the boomers controlling the younger generation. You got to remember, most companies that are doing these freaking agile projects are failing, which is odd. They say it, like this guy says it right in the video. I mean, he's doing a critique of a 4-minute video that's actually apparently attacking him specifically, which is hysterical. Half right, half wrong on both sides. It's hysterical to watch. It's called Scams in Software Engineering by ThePrimeTime, if you want to check it out. I didn't finish the whole thing because I'm not gonna, because it's half an hour and I'm sure I have to shave my invisible cat or something way more important. The problem is that the intellectuals have flattened things out, said everybody's equal and everybody can learn to code, made everything easier in coding, right? Like, oh, you don't need to worry about memory management. We can make the computer do that. Can you? And I've heard this argument, right? But the bottom line is I run very simple myself. I run. I'm not retarded. I know how to run these tests. Been doing software testing for longer than I've been coding. It's not that hard. But it is a skill and you do have to learn it. It ain't faster. It's much slower when the computer does memory management. Period. And it has to be mathematically certain to be, right? If you cannot do memory management better and quicker than the computer, maybe you shouldn't code. Like, seriously, like maybe it's not right for you, or maybe you shouldn't code at that level, right? I mean, I'm cool with that. Let's go back to having like 5 good software engineers. Okay, I'm cool. I don't think I'd be included in the list, by the way, but I don't care, right? I care more about quality software because that improves people's lives rather than having to deal with the latest bug on my freaking phone, because this thing gets bugs all the time now. Okay, past week, 10 updates a day. 10 updates a day on 150 apps, guys. What are we doing? That's not sustainable. Who's coding this shit? It's garbage. Who's doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you subjecting the world to this? And not like you have a choice. Like, oh, I'll design our own phones and we can load our own site. That's not going to work. I can't manage that. Well, actually, I could manage that. It would be costly. And there's other things I want to do, like manage my garden. Much more important than managing some effing phone so I can make a damn phone call and surf the internet when I'm bored. Oh, and play Risk, because playing Risk is good. I have time for that. Really. Like, no, ain't nobody got no time for that. There's better things to do in life. And it really what it boils down to is better things to do in life. One way to look at the world is to say, why are we focused on software? It's not a bad question. Why is everyone focusing on software? There's plenty of jobs in farming we could be doing. There's plenty of other things to do. Why are we buying, you people buy rocks and blah. And it's like, you're buying video games, dog. Like, what do you mean people buy rocks? At least I can throw rocks at your head because you're retarded. Like, what are we doing? Why are we using up all our time, burning electricity and then crying about it because it's destroying the climate? Like, there's all these contradictions. That's really the problem. All these contradictions. And people don't see the contradictions. It's interesting, too, because this guy, he starts out really good. He's like, yeah, in college, you should learn, not the classics. He doesn't say it that way, but basically the classics. You should learn how to, put things together and how to think. And yes, that is what you should learn. And then you should, specialize in something. Right, to some extent. I'm not against specialization, but we don't. And when you carve software up into front end, back end, mid tier, and I'm not saying that's invalid. I certainly sometimes do that for certain purposes, right? You make a mistake, especially when it's front end tool of the week, and you're coding little tiny scripts in 4 to 6 lines so that they're quote maintainable. The problem is this: complex software is not maintainable, period. And spreading things out amongst a bunch of functions is not helpful. And yeah, when you do that, you make a bunch of trade-offs. And one of the things that it affords is maintenance by people who didn't write the original function, the ability of dumber and dumber people to do software. And I don't think that's a good thing. If you think that's a good thing, that's great. At the same time, he's complaining about software and software quality. And it's not just him. Like, a lot of people are doing this. They're actually saying things like, well, it's no good because, you get a high-paying job in the software industry and then you end up laid off. That's kind of telling you that the problem isn't that the people in the software companies are enslaving you to do their will. The problem is the industry is completely broken and nobody knows how to run a software company anymore. Because that's the problem. Right? Yes, you're fully dependent upon employers as an employee by definition. And he makes a good point. Not everybody can go off and make their own company. Right. The big push now. And you see this worldwide, but you see it at the federal level in the United States, is to start your own company. Do not, under any circumstances, start your own company. Oh my goodness. What a horrific idea. If you want to do something like a cottage industry at scale of your home, absolutely sure, go for it. That's way easier. You do not want to try to start your own company and raise VC funds and run things. It's too hard. Right. The first problem with companies is they need management. You can't agile your way to victory, except in certain very specific circumstances. And you're not in those circumstances, and you're not that type of person. Sorry, you're just not. And people need to hear that more. Like, yeah, so-and-so did this, but you didn't and you can't. And if you follow in their footsteps, you're not them and it won't work for you. That's not in every case, but it's almost certainly true for you. You just need to give up and do something you can handle. You can't do memory management in C at the same rate of speed, in a performance test as a language that can do memory management. Maybe you shouldn't do that, right? I drive around. I say this all the time. It looks like that person doesn't know how to drive. Maybe they should not drive. It's not a hard problem. Oh, I suck at driving. Don't drive. Problem solved. It's not. It's not difficult. You hear all this talk about Agile. You hear all this talk about the problems of the Agile and the problems of the industry because, people are doing this to you. These are midwits trying to make sense of the world. And they're only able to see tiny sliver of the world, right? They're looking up and they're seeing oppression. And they don't see that failure of the system, right? However you want to classify that, we'll just call it the industry. Software industry is failing, looks a lot like tyranny. Because failure is a tyranny against success. By definition, by the way, so I want to get into a philosophical argument about it. It's not that hard, right? Failure and success are mutually exclusive, for sure. As the software industry fails and we have just more and more garbage software left, right, and center, things get worse. And I pine for the days when we had good software engineers. And if you want to see an example of this, I did a live stream on Navigating Patterns recently where I talked about this. Look up buffer bloat. Okay. They had to go back and get the guys who originally wrote the TCP/IP protocol to fix it. One of those guys he knew all the other guys, right? Getty. I think I've mentioned this before on this channel. He was the only person available in the industry who could find the bug. Okay? This stuff is hard. It's really hard. Level of complexity for something like an algorithm. I mean, I know people, I specialize in algorithms and I know log n and log o and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, maybe, but can you actually build one from scratch or can you just classify them? Because those are two different skills. It's interesting. He goes into classification and the uselessness of it in this Scams in Software Engineering video that he did. He's right there, but he doesn't get it either, right? I mean, he's close. He's better than nothing. I like the guy. I mean, I think he's a bit of a goofball, and I'm not a fan of his, we'll say, lack of masculinity, that's for sure. But like, he's so close, but he can't get there, which is very funny, right? Have you been lied to if somebody didn't tell you these complicated things, or worse yet, did they tell you and you just didn't understand it? Because that happens a lot. I used to train people. I used to do corporate training. The number of people that come out of the training and actually get the material is always disappointingly low. Always, unless you have a particularly good class, but like that's you getting lucky. It's good to know, right? And people don't account for that, but that happens all the time. So, the industry is collapsing. It's been collapsing for 15 years. It's not pretty. Which is ironic. I'm like, it's not hard to run a software company. It's hard to find good engineers, right? Because again, flood of engineers. It's almost biblical, one might say. Flood of engineers, and they all suck. Finding good engineers is hard. I know a couple still, but like, it's really hard to. And they talk about that. Interviews, whiteboard interviews. How do you interview? And the thing is, they shouldn't be talking like that because companies didn't used to do this. They didn't used to buy people who had the skills that the company needed to get the product done. That actually never happened except in very, very exceptional circumstances, right? Where you actually needed an expert because it was core to your business. What would happen is people would hire people with potential and develop them. The software industry can't do that anymore because it's collapsing too quickly. These companies don't even have time to think about it that way. The reason why it's collapsing, the thing that's causing the collapse, is the materialism. You start a software company to make money, or you start a software company because it's easy and you can get a product out, right? Like it's not all non-ideal or money-based or something, but a lot of it is, right? And the primary concern is, well, if you can't make money with it, then you shouldn't do it, sort of thing. And then you have a company like Amazon. Amazon's never going to have been profitable, ever. They're skirting a bunch of rules and regulations and laws that apparently we gave up on in the United States to prevent companies from operating at a loss for a long period of time. Amazon's never going to make back their investment money, ever, 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 ever. It's not actually mathematically possible anymore. And that's been true for quite a few years. And nobody noticed right? You just don't count all the money that got dumped into it in the beginning, and right now it looks profitable. But like if you want a return on that cash, you've been getting the return by getting new investors. It's technically a Ponzi scheme because they all believe in the Jeff Bezos thing. They believe what Jeff Bezos is saying about when we capture X percentage of the retail market, we will have all the profits, and everybody will save money because we won't take as many profits as the retail establishments will because their costs are lower. That's not going to end up being true, by the way. And maybe he still believes that. I have no idea. But it was always a scam. And that's the problem. The software industry turned into a scam at some point. Not deliberately. It wasn't, somebody, nefarious at the top or 12 people in a room smoking cigars or anything like that. But materialism flattens the world. And when you flatten the software industry down to coding, which is an important but not big part of the picture, you have a problem. How, if the internet goes down, will your code work? For how long? Right? The internet is huge, right? What does it take to run network infrastructure that goes through everybody's house or everybody's phone? You're relying on all that. Oh no, I've got software that runs locally. On which operating system? And when Microsoft pushes an update, will it still work? Right? Because we're updating constantly. We get these things called rolling releases. These things are rolling release. You can't, either it rolls or it has a release schedule. It can't have both. They're mutually exclusive, right? So, like, which is it? Do you understand the because it's a super important difference, right? Like either there's a flag or there isn't. You just kind of change. But when things change, what's changing, and does it affect the software that I just wrote? I don't know. How does it affect the interaction between pieces of software? Because those are the bugs we're finding the most of now. Sure, no one's noticed. It's hard to track. Like I'm not saying like, oh, it's obvious, you should see it. No, it's hard to track. But actually, a lot of the bugs we see are interaction bugs or integration bugs between different pieces of software written sometimes by the same group or the same company or groups that are cooperating. But more often, just because there's more software out there written by different people, different interaction between different pieces of software. And so I run KeePass, KeePass. KeePass doesn't work correctly with Windows 11. It worked with Windows 10. But there's little bugs. They're minor bugs. But it's buggy. It doesn't work, right? And there's small weird side effects. I'm used to them all, so I just work around them. But it doesn't work. Why? Because Microsoft changed something. The functionality's there, but the underlying way that functionality is executed has changed such that KeePass can't do focus window switch anymore. You can't go back to the last active application, right? Which is what you want because it's a password manager. So occasionally it doesn't autofill or there's things it can't autofill, obviously, because they're not web pages or they're misdesigned web pages. And so, you go there and you copy the password and it's supposed to flick you back, like the alt tab you back, and can't do that anymore under Windows 11. Why? I don't know. It works fine on Windows 10. It works fine on Windows 7, right? I don't know what they changed. I have no idea. And how long before they change it again? Will KeePass keep up? Will they even notice? Because no one's doing any software testing anymore, so no one noticed. I get no idea. None. So you see these patterns. You see this stuff playing out. And everybody's sort of like figuring it out for themselves incorrectly because they're midwits. And they're not looking at the bigger picture. And again, all of this stuff in the software industry is reflected in the wider world. It just kind of focused in on the software industry for I would call them obvious reasons, right? It's very tech heavy, and technology is parasitic, so it's going to eat it, and it's quick, right? It iterates quickly. So it's going to eat itself first, long before books, because it's coming to books too. You're going to see it. You're going to see it in authors soon, and literature in general, right? You've already seen it to some extent, right? You've already seen it in music, right? Music evolved very quickly. You've already seen it in music, and they're going to get around that music with different genres for a while. They'll do the same in literature, but in software, it's getting harder and harder and harder because it doesn't matter what kind of software you're talking about anymore. Most of it's garbage now, and that's horrible. I mean, it's just like terrible. I never saw this coming, and I couldn't have conceived of anything so stupid. And it really wasn't until the buffer bloat incident, which for some reason I just happened to cotton on too early, like when in the middle of it happening, that I realized, oh no. The problem is we've lost the people who actually know what they're doing. We've lost the 1% in the software industry. They're not there. There is no 1% in the software industry, right? They're gone. They're either passed away, or people are going to physics instead. I don't know where the smart people are going. And now we get a bunch of people who have no idea what they're doing, running the ship, and the ship's running aground because that's what happens, or it's hitting a bridge. Too soon. Yeah, it's a problem. But I had to get that off my chest. It's an interesting video. It's interesting to watch these people try to analyze something that they don't have the history of, don't really know, haven't been in that. Oh, I've been in software for 20 years. That's not long enough, buddy. And you got to study the history. You got to really know some of the history, especially with Agile, to understand what the problem is. So, yeah, I mean, meaning crisis confirmed.